The wine was poured, the lights were low, and the silence between them stretched just a second too long. Leia crossed her legs with deliberate elegance, her crimson toenails catching the soft glow from the fireplace. "You're staring," she said, not looking at him. Brian smiled over the rim of his glass. That slow, calculating smile that had once thrilled her and now felt like a challenge wrapped in condescension. "Just wondering," he drawled, "if you still have that charm, that dangerous little thing you used to flash at men when you wanted your way." Leia arched a brow. "Used to? You've been out of the game for a while," he continued, swirling the wine. "Married life has a way of softening people." She let out a low laugh. "And yet here we are, you provoking, me rising." Brian leaned forward, his blue eyes sharp. "All right then, flirt with Ryan." The words hit the air like a thrown gauntlet. Her smirk didn't flinch. "Your boss?" He shrugged. "CEO of the year, charmer, unattainable. It would be harmless fun. You still know how to play, don't you?" Play. The word rang in her head like a distant echo. Of heels clicking across marble, of red lips curled in mischief, of nights she hadn't allowed herself to remember. Leia reached for her wine. "Sure," she said, voice smooth as silk. "Let's play." The corporate gala was held on the rooftop of a skyscraper, Manhattan glittering beneath like a kingdom. Waiters in white gloves floated through the crowd with trays of oysters and champagne. Leia stepped out of the elevator, and time paused. She wore a red dress, the one. Silk that clung like a secret. Diamond studs, not flashy, but sharp. Lips the shade of defiance. She could feel eyes turning. She found Brian near the bar, already nursing a drink, talking to someone from legal. He didn't see her yet, but he did. Ryan King stood near a sculpture installation, shirt casually unbuttoned at the collar, talking to two VPs. His eyes found her in an instant. Not a flicker of hesitation, not even a blink. Just recognition. Interest. She walked toward him, slow and confident, each step a statement. "Mr. King," she said, voice a low melody. "Mind if I interrupt?" His smile came slowly, like it had to travel through layers of instinct. "I was hoping you would." The conversation that followed was all heat and subtext. She made a joke, he leaned closer. She mentioned Paris, he asked her favorite arrondissement, she laughed. Genuinely, damn it. And his gaze flicked to her lips just for a moment too long. From across the room, Brian was watching and smiling. Bea lifted her glass toward Ryan as if to toast something invisible between them. Checkmate, or just the first move? Leia didn't need to look over her shoulder to know Brian was still watching. His presence hung in the air, smug and satisfied, as if he had set a trap and now simply waited for it to spring shut. But this wasn't his game anymore. Brian's gaze lingered on her a second too long. Not the kind of stare men gave to pretty women at events like this. No, his eyes were more calculating. Less hunger, more interest. As if she were a puzzle and he was already looking for the edges. "I don't think we've officially met," she said. Her tone was playful, but her pulse had picked up. "Leia, I know." He offered his hand, firm grip, warm skin. "Ryan, you're not on our team, are you?" "Not yet," she smiled. He laughed, a quiet, knowing sound, and motioned to the terrace just beyond the glass doors. "Walk with me?" The city hummed around them as they stepped outside, a quiet reprieve from the polished chaos inside. The skyline stretched before them, endless and alive. "Your husband works in operations, right?" he asked, too casual. Leia's jaw tightened for a moment. "He does. He mentioned you once, not by name, just that you used to light up a room." Ryan turned to her. "I can see he undersold it." Leia sipped her champagne, ignoring the chill in her stomach. So, Brian had set this up well. Casual flattery, a little curiosity. Let his boss do the seducing while he watched from the shadows. She was supposed to flirt, to make Ryan stumble. Maybe earn a story to toss back at Brian when he got bored. But Ryan wasn't stumbling. He was leading. "You're not like most people at these things," he said suddenly. "Because I'm not drinking too much or desperately trying to impress you? Because you're actually listening." That caught her off guard. She looked at him more closely now. The crisp suit, loosened tie, that silver at his temples that made him look more grounded than graying. There was weariness in his smile. Not just from work, but from something else. Something older. "You don't enjoy these events either," she said, more softly. "Not unless there's a surprise? And am I a surprise?" He gave her a long, thoughtful look. "You might be." She turned away, letting the wind tease the ends of her hair. She didn't know how to respond to that, not without stepping over some invisible line, one she had thought she could walk like a tightrope. But now, with the air charge and Ryan standing too close, She wasn't sure the rope had ever existed. Inside, a soft jazz number started up. Ryan tilted his head slightly. Dance with me. Now? Why not? For a heartbeat, she hesitated, but then she took his hand. They danced slowly under the stars, the city flickering around them. His hand rested respectfully at her waist, but her body betrayed her. Leaning in ever so slightly, her cheek grazing his shoulder, she wasn't pretending anymore. And that was dangerous. After a moment, he spoke quietly, almost intimately. You're not here just for the drinks and company, are you? Her heart thudded. She pulled back slightly, studying him. You're not just a charming CEO, are you? Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Toosh! A server passed by with more champagne, and Leia took one, just to break the moment. She felt the warmth of his hand leave her waist. Thank you for the dance, she said, voice even. My pleasure. He didn't stop her when she turned to leave, but his voice followed her as she stepped inside. Tell your husband he should be careful what games he starts. Her breath caught. She didn't look back. The next morning, Leia stood in front of the mirror, brushing her fingers through her hair and wondering when exactly the lines had started to blur. Her reflection stared back with a question she didn't want to answer. Was it still a game? The red dress from the gala hung neatly on the closet door. Like a flag marking the moment she stopped being Brian's wife and started being something else entirely. A player, a rival, or maybe, terrifyingly, herself? Her phone buzzed. Ryan King, enjoyed our dance. Be careful, you're not the only one being watched. The message sat on the screen like a lit fuse. Not flirtatious, not friendly. A warning wrapped in silk. She deleted it. At the office, things felt charged, but polished. Like a glass of expensive champagne with a shard of glass hidden inside. Brian was unusually cheerful, his tone just a shade too smug as he recounted a conversation with a VP who'd apparently found Leia surprisingly charming. So, he said over dinner that night, what's it like knowing my boss finds you irresistible? Leia looked up from her plate. I don't know, Brian, what's it like pretending you're not getting off on the idea? He blinked, not because of the bite in her voice, but because he hadn't expected her to swing back so soon. You always did have a flair for drama, he said, and you always did mistake control for love. He smiled, slow and unbothered. What can I say? You make a beautiful weapon. She didn't answer, because that was the problem, wasn't it? He had made her a weapon. But somewhere along the way, she'd learned to sharpen herself. 2 days later, Leia stepped into the CEO's private conference suite for what was supposed to be a strategy session on a new internal branding initiative. She'd expected a few department heads, a few generic ideas thrown around. But the room was empty, save for Ryan, seated at the head of the table, with his sleeves rolled up and that unreadable expression on his face. This wasn't a real meeting, was it? She asked. He gestured to the seat across from him. I wanted to see you again without the audience. Her heart thudded. Is that professional? I'm not here to be professional with you, he said. I'm here to understand what you want. She sat slowly, folding her hands in front of her. What makes you think I know? He leaned in, voice low. Because when you kissed me on that terrace, it wasn't for him. I didn't kiss you. Exactly. The room went still. Ryan stood, circled the table, and stopped behind her chair. Laird, do you want to keep playing this out like it's nothing? Because if you do, I'll respect that. We'll stop here. No more messages, no more moments. And if I don't, then you need to be honest with yourself about what happens next. Because I don't start something I don't intend to finish. She turned in her chair slowly until they were face to face. You assuming I want something to happen? He nodded. I am. And then, no theatrics, no hesitation. He leaned in and kissed her. It was slow at first, deliberate. Not the kind of kiss meant for proving a point or winning a game. It was something real. And she kissed him back before her mind could issue a single protest. When they finally pulled apart, the silence between them said more than any words could. I shouldn't have, she whispered, but you did. That night, Leia sat in the bathtub, knees hugged to her chest, the water slowly turning cold. Her phone was face down on the tile. She couldn't bring herself to check it. Her thoughts flickered wildly. Ryan's hand on her cheek, the way he didn't smirk afterward like Brian would have. He looked like a man who had just made a choice, not won a point. And Brian? He'd always been watching her like a possession. Ryan looked at her like a risk. Somewhere in the silence of the room, her stomach turned. She got out, wrapped herself in a towel, and finally picked up the phone. A new message from Brian. Brian, lunch with Ryan on Saturday? Cute. You do realize I have friends in the office too, right? She stared at the text, bile rising. So he'd been keeping tabs. She typed a reply, paused, and then deleted it. She needed to be smarter than him now. Friday morning, a small envelope arrived at her desk with no sender's name. Inside was a single key. A penthouse address was scrawled on the card tucked beside it. Nothing more. No note, no time, just a choice. And the strange, thrilling sense that someone somewhere had just raised the stakes again. Leia stood outside the glass tower on Madison Avenue, the envelope still in her coat pocket, the key pressed between her fingers like a secret. She could feel the cool bite of it, the weight of an unspoken question. She hadn't told anyone she was going, not even the version of herself that still clung to rules and reason. She stepped into the private elevator, no security desk, no concierge, just a silent ascent to the penthouse floor, as if the building itself understood discretion. The door opened onto a space that felt too intentional to be called an apartment. It was a statement. Minimalist but expensive, all glass and steel and soft gray textures, and yet it didn't feel sterile. There was jazz playing somewhere in the background, and Ryan, standing by the window, looking out over the skyline like he'd been expecting her all along. "You came," he said simply. "I'm not sure why." "Good, that means you're not here with a script." She took off her coat and wandered toward the edge of the living room, letting the view distract her. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't fill the silence. "I don't know what you think this is," she finally said. "I don't need it to be anything, just real." "The word again," she said, finally, crossing her legs and leaning into the discomfort. "So this is real now?" Ryan took a seat across from her, hands resting lightly on his knees. "It could be, but only if you're done pretending." Leia let out a slow breath. "And if I say I'm still pretending, then I'll ask you to leave, not because I want you to, but because I won't be a prop in someone else's marriage." The air shifted. She studied him, waiting for the angle, the reveal, the line that would remind her he was just another player in this twisted triangle. But it wouldn't come. Instead, he stood and walked to a side table, picked up a black velvet box, and placed it in front of her. She didn't open it. "You don't need to look," he said. "It's not a proposal. It's a symbol." She opened the lid. Inside was a diamond ring, elegant, modern, unlike anything Brian had ever chosen for her. There was no note, no promise. Just a question she wasn't ready to answer. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I've met 100 women in this city. None of them ever scared me. And I scare you. Only when you're honest." She looked away. She was on the edge of something she didn't recognize. Not quite love, not quite rebellion. Just choice. Later that evening, they ate dinner on the terrace, quiet, candlelit, too intimate for what was supposed to be a strategic affair. She caught herself laughing once, genuinely, and immediately bit it back. It's when Ryan told her. "Your husband made a bet," he said, pouring more wine. Her body tensed. "What? A bet? With 2 colleagues, said you'd flirt your way to the top floor, but you wouldn't land anything real." Leia blinked, her voice dropping. "He told you this?" "Indirectly. I overheard enough, and I made it clear I wasn't interested in playing along." She swallowed. The wine turned bitter in her mouth. "You knew this whole time?" Her voice shook. "That I was just bait? I knew he thought you were. I didn't agree." Her eyes stung. "And yet you invited me here to offer you something real, something that's not built on his game." She stood, suddenly needing distance. The terrace was too open, too exposed. "You could have told me. I needed to see what you would do." She whirled to face him. "So it was a test?" "No." His voice was calm, measured. "It was a mirror. I needed to see if you were acting or choosing." Leia pressed her hands to her temples. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not." He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "You're just finally seeing clearly." The next morning, her phone buzzed as she pulled on her coat. "Brian, you've made it to the penthouse, I see. Hope the view's worth it. Your performance deserves a round of applause." Leia stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. There would be no reply, no fight, because the only way to win was not to play. She turned back to Ryan, who stood barefoot in the kitchen, making coffee like they'd known each other for years. "Keep the key," he said. "I shouldn't. That's your choice." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. When she walked out of the penthouse, she wasn't walking away from him. She was walking toward herself. The auditorium buzzed with tension. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled daylight over rows of perfectly pressed suits, stiff smiles, and curated ambition. Leia stood behind the velvet curtain backstage, her palms clammy against the sleek glass of her water bottle. This was it. Her presentation wasn't just about a rebrand anymore. It had become a declaration of who she was, of what she had chosen, of what she would no longer accept. And they were both here. Brian seated near the front, legs crossed, wearing the smug expression of a man who believed he still had control. And Ryan standing quietly near the side aisle, unbothered by the whispers his presence stirred. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just waited. For her 3 minutes, someone whispered behind her. She nodded, adjusted the gold clasp of her belt, and took one long breath. The lights dimmed, and the MC announced her name. Please welcome Leah Morris, creative consultant, brand strategy. The applause was polite, formal, but the second she stepped onto the stage, something in the room shifted. She was dressed simply, black silk blouse, tailored pants, bold red lipstick, no wedding ring, no apology. Thank you, she began, her voice firm. Today's not just about branding. It's about clarity, about knowing what you represent and standing behind it. She clicked the remote. Slides flickered across the screen. Elegance, power, vision. But no one was looking at the slides. They were looking at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the way she moved, like she wasn't asking for the room, but owning it. As she wrapped the final slide, the silence before the applause was deafening, like the room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. And then it erupted. When she stepped down from the stage, Brian was already moving toward her, clapping louder than anyone, smile wide, ready to collect his prize. That was exceptional, he said, voice warm, hand reaching for her elbow. See, I always knew you had it in you. She looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. Did you bet on this too? She asked softly. His smile faltered. Leah, she didn't wait for the denial. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out the old wedding ring, the one that had meant something once before it became a weight. She placed it in his hand. No hard feelings, she said, but I'm not your challenge anymore. Brian's face darkened. So, that's it. She leaned in just enough for only him to hear. That was your game. This is my life. And with that, she walked away. Ryan hadn't moved. He stood where he'd been all along, hands in his pockets, watching, not claiming, but just waiting. When she reached him, she said nothing, just looked at him, and he smiled. Not triumphant, not smug, just quietly relieved, like someone who'd waited a long time for something worth it. You sure? He asked. No, she said honestly. But I'm done being unsure for someone else's comfort. He opened the door for her. She walked through it. Later that night, in the back of a quiet town car gliding through Manhattan, Leah looked down at the new ring on her finger. Sleek, elegant, uncompromising. Not a promise, not yet, but a beginning. She glanced at Ryan, whose hand rested lightly over hers. I wasn't looking for love, she said, almost to herself. And I wasn't looking for war, he replied. They exchanged a glance, wry, warm, charged with something neither of them dared name yet. By midnight, she had the keys to his suite and a new ring.